The left versus the right.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Paterson. This is The Left versus the Right. We'll be here until 4 o'clock discussing a lot of very important issues that have come up this week. None more tragic than the assassination of Charlie Kirk on, I guess it was Wednesday afternoon. Isn't that right, Your Honor?
That's correct.
And the perpetrator was arrested apparently late Thursday night. And on Friday morning on Fox News, President Trump went on to announce that. And President Trump sat and talked to the Fox people for about 45 minutes. He was just in his glory. And he'd been to the Yankee game, and Aaron Judge had 2 home runs. He said he never saw anyone with forearms bigger than Aaron Judge's. So he was having a good time, but he did take the time out to talk about his relationship with Charlie, how much he admired him, how they had worked together. He told a story about Charlie calling him up and asking him to come to Atlantic City to some event. It was really going to be great. And Trump says to him, "Charlie, I can't come to everything you asked me to come to. I'm the president. I live in Washington." So he was, added a little frivolity to a very awful and tragic situation, and one that I think time and time again makes us look back on what kind of society we're living in and how these situations occur, that individuals such as the one who shot Mr. Kirk wind up in a position where they would actually think to go and do something like that. How do you feel? What say you, Your Honor?
Well, first of all, I feel like the Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. I am Judge Richard Weinberg with my good friend who knows me so well he doesn't see me anymore, Governor David Paterson, and I'm happy to be here. So what do I think? I think we're at a treacherous point of time in American history. I don't think this country's been so divided other than the United States Civil War. We're coming up, Governor, in less than a year in our 250th anniversary. And while I'm generally optimistic personally and for the future of our country and humanity, I'm most pessimistic I've ever been. Why do I say that? Because I think we've entered a period of time where there's no tolerance for diverse views. There's an acceptance of the language of combat, threats of political violence, acting out with political violence. That's how you destroy a country. You destroy a country first and foremost from the inside, then your external enemies take advantage of that. We are divided. We have a culture that encourages, fosters political violence. The media encourages it. The so-called political leadership encourages it. And I'm deeply troubled. The assassination of Charlie Kirk is one of the most troubling events we've had in recent times. I don't think the level of violence and hatred in this country, Governor, has been this extensive and so vast since 1968 with the assassinations of Dr. King and Senator Bobby Kennedy, and I think George Wallace was shot that year as well.
George Wallace was shot in 1972 when he was running for president, and he survived the attack, but he was paralyzed ever since.
It was just an awful situation. So the question becomes, how do we get here to this troubling passage? I think because there's a level of irresponsibility. There's no respect for a diverse point of view. The media has encouraged confrontation. This is not a reality show with confrontation, with people throwing chairs at each other. When you keep calling people fascists and you're destroying democracy, you're encouraging the crazies out there, and there are plenty of crazies out there, both left and right, to violence. And that's what we see happening. Now, I read an interesting article, David, in The Spectator, which it says that the history of the left throughout history has been one where they promise humanity and equality and fairness and generosity of spirit, fundamentally, it's a intellectual and a rhetorical regime and a practice regime of violence and bloodshed. They promise you the world, they promise you everything, and what they give you is bloodshed, intimidation, oppression. What are your thoughts?
So when I was at Columbia University, I was a history major, and I really was amazed at the turnovers in governments around the world, practically all through history, where the incumbents were thrown out and those who thought they had a better philosophy would come in, and within 5 to 10 years, you had a dictatorship that superseded anything that a winning party in an election would have been able to perform. And it happens over and over again. Of course, most recently in our time, it happened with Fidel Castro. He was supposed to make Cuba this great place and opportunities for everyone and all this stuff, and it turned out to be the exact opposite. So there is a real fear I have at the conversation about socialism, because in principle, theoretically, if we had, benign and pure hearts every place, would be a good system. But that's not where the world is, and there's no reason that we should entertain it. And then that brings us to the current mayoral campaign, where it appears that there may be an opportunity for Mayor Adams to contribute to stopping the city from going into that kind of socialist realm. Whether he decides to get out or not, I think it's likely that he will. There was some talk on Thursday that he was talking to a group of businessmen and suggested it. But if he does get out, that still leaves a problem, because the former governor, Andrew Cuomo, would really like to have a one-on-one with Mamdani. And what's in his way is that Curtis Sliwa, at 15% in the polls, will probably not get out of the race, which I think on Curtis's part would be a real misjudgment. Because if Mamdani wins, if Mamdani wins right now and they all stay in, then you would wind up blaming Curtis and the mayor. But it'll just be Curtis if Mamdani defeats him along with former Governor Cuomo.
Well, the name of this show is Left versus Right. And in the interest of full disclosure, Governor Paterson and I are both Democrats. We're both centrists, moderates. There's not a left way or a right way to run the city of New York. LaGuardia famously said there's no Democratic or Republican way to collect the garbage. This is a budget of approximately, Governor, $116 billion.
Right.
It takes real management skills. It takes a real understanding of the politics of governance as opposed to the politics of electability. You need political skills in each, one to win, two to govern. And you have to understand this is a diverse town. And when you have a candidate like a Mamdani, who is an avowed democratic socialist, who has abided by their platforms. Their platforms are a permanent revolution against Western civilization, socialism for the entire country, permanent intifada, which means a violent attack against your cultural, religious, or political enemies. First and foremost, the Jewish community. But radical Islamists don't stop with the Jews. First, they come from the Jews, as they often say. But the Christians are next. And if you see what the radical Islamists have done throughout Africa and the Middle East, they're killing the Christians and the Buddhists and the Zoroastrians and other groups, Alawites and other groups in enormous numbers. So this is a serious business. That's not to say that all Muslims are Islamists, but there's a cult in the Muslim group which believes they have a hegemonic right to dominate the world, to impose through violence and domination their religious, cultural, political views. And that's a threat to America. Mamdani, if he sincerely wants to be the mayor of the city of New York and wants to govern for all, he has to renounce the Democratic Socialist agenda. He has to denounce from the river to the sea, which is a code word for the extermination of the Jewish people and the takeover by the Hamas crowd, a recognized terrorist group of the state of Israel. There cannot be a two-state solution as long as Hamas is in power. They have to be forced out of Gaza. That's essential. And Mamdani has to understand he has two big problems. One, he's a socialist, and socialism does not work. There's no place in history where socialism worked. It starts off with all kinds of glorious promises, as you pointed out, Governor. They promise you the world, free this, free that, but ultimately they can't afford that. As Margaret Thatcher pointed out, pretty soon you run out of other people's money.
Now, Mr. Mamdani, the Assemblyman, Mr. Mamdani, is 33 years old, and he served 2 terms in the Assembly. And what surprised me about him, because he is a dynamic speaker, he gets people's attention, he has a flair about him, even when there's someone who you don't agree with, you kind of have to tip your hat to the fact that there are gifts that he has. But when he actually does start talking, he has no real sense of what the substantive issues are in this city. He doesn't talk about them. Situations like poor housing, crime, unemployment, underemployment, poor and inadequate healthcare facilities, an educational system that's really practically in ruin right now. And he doesn't really propose any solutions. He doesn't come up with any intellectual ideas about how we might change situations. And yet, every time he comes up with a new proposal, there was the one to, it's only a misdemeanor to be, I'm just trying to remember, Your Honor, help me.
He wants to abolish misdemeanors.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't want to prosecute anyone related to prostitution. Some of these things, had they been said a few years ago, you would have thought it was some high school student leader that said these things. Now, he seems to have backed off the police department a little bit, and he did go to the funeral of the slain off-duty officer at 345 Park Avenue a month and a half ago. And he has sounded as if he has a little more respect for the police department. But as you get closer to Election Day, and even though he's way ahead in the polls, Andrew Cuomo was way ahead of the polls in the primary, and he got pulverized in the primary eventually. So I think he's trying to hedge his bets a little bit, but I think at this point, nobody's going to see through it. Either they want him to come in with a complete socialist agenda. Those are the large number of people who support him, or they will turn on him if he appears to not be fulfilling the full agenda. My comment has always been, if you agree with a socialist 100% of the time, they will like you. If you agree with a socialist 99% of the time, they'll hate you. That's just how driven they are. And I think this is going to be a referendum on more than just policy. It's going to be a referendum on leadership. And I don't think that he has demonstrated the capacity to do that. But right now, we're getting real close to the election, Your Honor, and we'll see what happens.
Well, as Richard Nixon would say, let me say this about that. So let's talk about who Mamdani is. We know he's an avowed democratic socialist. We know he supports Islamists. We know some of his best friends are Islamists who think that 9/11 was justifiable. We know that. He has not repudiated that. So is this a man who can govern a city of New York as diverse as it is with a large population that doesn't subscribe to those views? The problem we have is that excuse me, he won the nomination for two basic reasons. Number one, the negatives didn't come out about him. The campaign run against him was no campaign at all in the Democratic primary. So nobody knew who this kid really was. That's number one. Number two, ranked choice voting. They all ganged up against Cuomo and said, put anybody down, but don't put Cuomo down. So all the left-wing candidates all support each other on the list, but they excluded Cuomo.
And that's why the election really, in many respects, it made the polls look inaccurate, when the polls probably were closer to being accurate. It's just that when the people who've decided they're not going to vote for Cuomo all pile up, they have to go somewhere. And it was enough to overwhelm him by 7 points, after the primary vote. Hopefully if it, in the general election, now we're talking about voting machines, counting up the votes the same night, none of the chicanery that's gone on for the past, this election and the quadrennial referendum in 2021 and races before that. But the issue with Mamdani is, I think it's going to be very hard for one man to serve two masters. One is being the mayor and all of the responsibility that goes with that. Two is making sure that his party members don't turn on him when he makes a decision that they don't like.
Well, that's giving him more credit than he may deserve, because what he assumed as he repudiated. I don't mean you personally. I mean one. Why does one assume that when he says they subscribe to these views and he tries to water them down for the purposes of electability, that when in office he's not going to carry them out? So what does that translate to? So let's take something I know a little bit about: public safety, law and order. The mayor of the city of New York, Governor, as you know, appoints the city judges. And as you also know, the city judges then move up the ranks to go to the state Supreme Court. I started as a city judge, criminal court of the city of New York, then I went on to the state Supreme Court. So that's the feeding ground for the state Supreme Court. As you know, state Supreme Court has a lot of power and responsibility in terms of the judicial process. So, and
I understand there was some political chicanery back about 15 years ago that you really should have gone to the Court of Appeals.
There was a governor who didn't know me as well then as he knows me today. He should have put me on the Court of Appeals. But that governor also said, no, the mistake wasn't putting Judge Weinberg on the Court of Appeals. The mistake was not making Judge Weinberg his counsel.
Yes.
I think that governor was right on both of those.
Actually, for our viewers, His Honor and myself have the luxury of working with the chair of the New York State Republican Party, Ed Cox. So sometimes before the shows or Katz and Cosby at 5 o'clock, the three of us sit and talk about different situations. And one of the things that you said just a few weeks ago, and I hadn't gotten a chance to talk to you about it alone, so I might as well talk to you about it in front of 1 million people, is that the counsel to the entity, whether it's the governor or the mayor, has got to be their consigliere. They've got to know everything that's going on, who's coming in the office and who isn't. And they have got to be able to, make sure that they are taking care of the interests of their boss. And that doesn't always happen. And I was thinking, after we had that conversation, how that happened to me. Now, we'll tell you how that happened to me, but we do have some sponsors who'd like to be heard before 4 o'clock. So we're going to take a little break here. We're on the left versus the right. We are with the esteemed Judge Richard Weinberg, and I am the esteemed David Paterson, and we'll be back right after these messages.
The Left versus the Right on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original. which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
The left versus the right.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
So we're back on left versus right, where you have two centrist moderate Democrats playing the role of left versus right. So far, we don't have a left and we don't have a right, but we have a common shared value of being common sense in the center. And when we closing out the first segment of the show, you raise the role of the consigliere to a elected official. I had the privilege and the pleasure of having that role with Speaker Peter Vallone, City Council. I was Peter's consigliere. I had the position of general counsel to the institution, the City Council, as well as being chief counsel to the Speaker. And I had both those roles at the same time. For the technical reason, I always want to make sure every time Peter Vallone and I had a conversation that we had an augment, that it was a privileged communication, whether I was representing the institution or representing the individual man. And that's why I had both titles.
What a history lesson.
Right. So let's go to that. My moral code has always been, Governor, as follows. If you're an advisor to a principal, you're the chief of staff to or the counsel to the governor, the mayor, the president, you have an obligation to tell that person, that principal, what he or she needs to hear, not what they want to hear. Your job is not to be a Greek chorus and say amen and ratify everything they want and tell them how wonderful they are and how absolute right they are. It's not your job to be intimidated that you'll be talked down to and your advice will be rejected. You have to have the courage of your moral compass and the courage of your intellectual prowess to speak up and to be heard.
And that's what earned you the lasting respect of Peter Vallone when he was the Speaker of the City Council, and has taken you to other places since then. You know, I'm just remembering that when I came into office, and this is March 17th of 2008. I don't know if you heard about this, but the governor resigned about a week before. And
you know, of course, that governor had been my intern after his first year at Harvard Law School.
I knew that. Okay. I knew that. And so, by the way, when Eliot Spitzer was governor from 2007 to that day, he was very willing to have me in meetings that I don't think a lieutenant governor would ever be in. Now, I had been the minority leader of the Senate, so I had, gotten into a leadership position already. But he certainly allowed me to hear what went on in a number of meetings. But now I'm going to tell you the meeting I refused to go to. So it's March 10th. It's a week before. And no one on Spitzer's staff comes to Albany. No one's there. But I don't know that because the lieutenant governor's office is on the third floor of the Capitol, not the second floor. But my staff realized it, and they're running around like, what's going on? This, that, and the other thing. And then finally, my secretary, Charles O'Byrne, calls me and says, there's a family planning event at 11 o'clock. The governor won't be here for a while. You need to go to that event. And I said, but, I'm busy up here. Now, Richard, lieutenant governors are never busy. You can write that down. If a lieutenant governor ever comes into your midst and says that they have a lot of work to do, call me because I will dispel it. So, but I do go to the family planning meeting. I speak, come back, 12 o'clock, and then around 12:30, they call back and they said, the cardinal is coming with all the bishops at 1:30. The governor will not be able to get here in time. You need to be the one to have the meeting. I said, I am not going to that meeting. And they said, well, this is an order from the governor for you to go to the meeting. I said, well, you tell the governor that a meeting between the cardinal and the governor is a meeting between two heads of state. You can't delegate that meeting. If the Queen of England comes to Washington to see President Bush, he can't go do something else and send Dick Cheney, although maybe he might have. But the point is that a lot of government is really about leadership, succession, and to a great extent being prepared if something goes wrong. And I am glad that I did actually think about what would happen if that moment came, though I saw it as a way out impossibility. But it certainly did come in March of 2010. Peter Vallone ran for governor in 1998, and that's the first time I met him. And I think I've told you the story before. He asked me to lunch, and I thought, okay, I'll go to have lunch with him. Because I had had a friendship with the man who was running against Joe Hines. And when I go in the restaurant, he's sitting, and I didn't even sit down. I went and stood next to him, and I said, Peter, I shouldn't even have wasted your time. I'm supporting Joe Hines. So, I hope you'll understand that. Vallone looks at me, and he says, sit down. So I sat down next to him. He says, first of all, I'm going to beat Hines so badly in the primary that he'll never run for anything again. He said, and second of all, since you worked for him, you're going to work double as hard for me so we can beat Pataki in the general election. And I'm sitting there thinking, who is this guy? I mean, he is one of the most unique people I've ever met in my life.
Truly, I was invited to interview for the position of being his counsel by people who knew both of us. I had never met Peter Vallone. I had read about him in the New York Times. I had read editorials supporting some of his legislative accomplishments and initiatives, but I hadn't met him. So I met him and I sat down with him and for an interview. First, I had an interview with senior staff, and then they cleared me to meet with him. Right. I was one of 3 finalists for the position. And the then chief of staff said to me, he said, you're my candidate. I want you to know that. Now, I'm sure he said that to the other 2 candidates as well. So whoever Peter decided he was going to take, he'd have that relationship with because he had made that proffer that I was his guy. I'm sure he said to the other 2 people as well. Knowing his political skills, I'm sure that's exactly what he did. But I went in, I sat down with Peter, and we started talking about this case called Morris versus the Board of Estimate, which abolished the Board of Estimate, which had all the power. It's what what Peter used to call the Board of Directors of the city.
Yes.
That consisted of the mayor, the so-called president of the city council, the borough presidents, the controller. And Peter said, what do you think about that? There's a case that's in the Supreme Court. And I said, well, he says, do you know about it? I said, yeah, I know about it. In fact, I've read the case. I've read some of the judicial decisions on the way. I said, you're going to win the case. The Board of Estimates can be abolished because it's a violation of one person, one vote. So Peter liked that because he knew I explained why that was true. And I said, and regardless of whether they win the case or not, there are other things the city council can do to become a more responsible, important player in the government. So that's why I had the job with Peter. The thing I liked about Peter most of all is Peter would listen to what you had to say. He would ultimately do his own thing if he thought it was the right thing to do, but he always gave his senior staff a hearing, and you didn't have to sugarcoat it. One of my favorite stories, which I'll share with our audience, which I'm allowed to say because Peter's told the story himself in public venues, otherwise I wouldn't tell the story, is we're sitting around one morning in City Hall, the senior staff, the chief of staff, me as general counsel, the speaker, the director of communications, the chief of investigations, the chief of finance, the land use director, and some idea had been proffered. Have no idea what the concept was, but I'm sitting in the room, and Peter goes around the room, and he solicits the opinion of everybody in the room, and they all think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And he comes to me, and he said, "What do you think?" I said, "I wouldn't do it." And everybody turns to me, why am I saying that? I said,
I know that feeling.
yeah, believe me. So I said, I wouldn't do it. And he said, why? I said, well, I don't think you have the legal authority to do it. And if you do it, you're going to be knocked down in court, or you're going to have to pull it back, and you're going to have a public relations problem. And that was the end of it. Fundamentally, Peter thanked me very much for my opinion and did what the majority of the people in the room had supported. About 3 or 4 weeks later, I'm at the Corporation Counsel's office having a meeting with the Corporation Counsel of the City of New York on some legislation. And this is before we had cell phones, ancient times.
Yeah.
And I got there's a phone call from my secretary to the Corporation Counsel's office. And they say, when I'm finished with this meeting, I should go immediately back to City Hall. Peter needs to see me. So I said, okay. I'd go back to City Hall. And Peter said, that issue that came up a few weeks ago, I said, which one was that, Peter? We've done dozens. So he says, the one where you objected and you told me not to do it, and I did it. And I said, yes, I remember that. He said, well, it's become a problem. He says, I'd like you to see what you can do to clean it up. So I said, let me see what I can do. I can't make a promise, but let me look into it. And I phoned the smartest women and men on my staff, and we put together a meeting, and we figured out how to handle it, and we retracted this gambit, and that was fine. About a month later, we're sitting in the morning meeting again. We go around the room. There's another idea being proffered. They come to me. They said, what would you do? And I said, I wouldn't do it. So
Here we go again.
There we are, deja vu all over again. And Peter says to me, he says, Richard, are you saying that so you can tell me I told you so? I said, no, Peter, I am telling you that so I don't have to tell you I told you so. But that was the kind of relationship I had with Peter, and that was the kind of man he was that would allow for that. I want to double back on Mamdani and some of the real concerns I have.
We can do more than double back on him.
Triple back. But let me say this about that. I've characterized him as a clear and present danger to the city. And the reason is because he's totally inexperienced. He's a captive of a radical group. He has no real life experience, a captive of a group, and he's dealing with a very complex government. In fact, as you know, running the city of New York may be the second or third hardest job in the country. It's harder to be mayor of the city of New York than respectfully the governor of the state of New York. It's just a tougher job.
Oh, mayor? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the great thing about when you're governor, you can hide.
Right, but you can't hide in the City Hall.
You can't hide in City Hall. And someone was talking to me about that. I said, listen, in Albany, half the people live there don't even know where the governor lives. In Manhattan, everybody knows where the mayor lives.
Exactly right. So let's talk about law and order, public safety. He said he wants to get rid of the strategic response team, okay? And he wants to replace that with social workers. So I submit to you the first time that there's a domestic violence situation that escalates into violence and a social worker is cut up or killed.
It's going to be on him.
It's going to be on him. Because the cops are trained to deal with these situations. They understand that. At certain times, you have to use reasonable force to protect the individuals involved in it as well as themselves. Additionally, he says he wants to, he hasn't repudiated defunding the police, and he wants to replace that budget with the social workers, which we've just pointed out it's a naive thing. So no strategic response. He wants to hire social workers. He wants to defund the police in its entirety and cut the budget. We have the threat of terrorism in New York City, as you well know, on a daily basis. It never goes away. We're the number one target of international terrorists and probably domestic terrorists as well. This is a real problem. You have to be able to run a police department where the cops know that the mayor of the city of New York has their back and will work with them and doesn't have a concept that they are the enemy. And Mamdani's on record as pointing out they're the enemy and they're a threat to the public safety. That's ridiculous. So you're going to have cops who are not going to trust him. They're going to retire early. All the seasoned people are going to leave, take early retirement, or get out while the getting is good. And who's going to guarantee the public safety? Secondly, he's against the basic undercover operations that you would use in using the city to make sure it's safe. And that includes radical Islamic extremists.
Sure.
And so you have to cooperate with the federal authorities and international authorities in doing that to keep the city safe. And how is he?
And they will take note if you don't fully cooperate with them.
That's right. And they'll walk away from you. And they'll put it's on you. It's on you. And they won't trust you. And you're going to have a real problem because it increases the exposure to the city of New York because of his radical Islamist views. He hasn't repudiated them yet. So that's one problem for the public safety. The other problem is, let's talk the issue about affordability, Governor. Affordability in housing. Well, let me say this about that. It's all about supply and demand. As long as you have onerous rent stabilization and rent control laws in place, and he wants to freeze rents, you're creating an economic disincentive to maintain your properties and an economic disincentive to build. And the housing stock will be depleted. And if the housing stock is depleted, the net result is less housing for people, less affordability, because this housing stock being depleted, the price will go up. And this will be a crisis of building. So what say you?
I couldn't agree more. And I think the other thing that is would be so much of a problem, having not had any experience in government other than as a legislator, where he really doesn't answer to anyone. He has a staff. He passed a couple of bills, something or other. When you get into the management of the city, you had better make sure that the people under you are completely understanding what the mission is. And if they're not, you'll have trouble from within, in addition to the fact that some of these plans that you put forward, particularly those situations involving 911 calls, domestic violence, the police come to the scene. If social workers come to the scene, do you think the original abuser is going to be frightened by a couple of social workers? They're not going to listen to them. And if anything, it might ignite more violence than there would have been if the police had come.
Well, these are real life problems, and you correctly pointed out earlier, this is about governing in a responsible way. And the problem is, if you don't have affordability, and if you don't have public safety, and you don't have a strong quality of life where people don't live in fear, and if you think that's a great idea to keep taxing people because there's always going to be plenty of money of other people's money around, you're going to have a flight from New York like we haven't seen before. And we've already lost in the last 3 or 4 years, Governor, about 400,000 people. And the 400,000 people you lost were the productive ones, the ones who pay the taxes.
Exactly.
The ones who give to the charities, the cultural institutions, the hospital, the educational institutions. These are the people who make the city go. And when they flee, what do you think is going to happen? Who are they replaced by? The free lunch crowd.
Well, we'll be right back to not only talk about the free lunches, but whatever else is free. And we're on the left versus the right. I'm David Paterson. He's Judge Richard Weinberg, my good friend. And we'll have a few words from our sponsors and be right back.
The left versus the right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The left versus the right.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We're back with the Honorable Judge Richard Weinberg, a man who was barred from going to the Court of Appeals. But that's another story. What we're talking about right now, and it's really a very serious situation, is this rhetoric that goes around and around that's fostered by social media, which is very often inaccurate, which challenges the basis of our freedoms in the first place. And it, on the lower frequencies, comes down to these people was Reynolds, is that his name? The kid that they picked up for shooting Charlie Kirk?
Robertson,
right.
Yeah.
And what is enticing? Well, he's 22 years old. He was not going to college. He was supposedly living with his family, but he had a roommate. So I guess he went back and forth. But I understand in some of the research that one of the friends of the family said they were there, and he was talking about Kirk coming to speak in Utah and what a terrible person he was. So it's clear that he didn't like him. But what drives an individual over the edge of just disliking someone, politician, and calling them a bum or something like that, to actually taking action to destroy his life, permanently change the life of his wife and his children, and just adding to the fear and anxiety that Americans all over the country feel. And it just, and it also struck me, Richard, that the shooting of President Trump, both attempts were only by one individual. The murder of Charlie Kirk is one assassin, as far as we know, and that every time somebody does get shot, everyone says it was a conspiracy or it came from the deep state or something like that. I'm just glad in this situation that we have arrived at a point where we know who the shooter was. That person's now in custody. They're being questioned. And Utah, along with the Justice Department, have a death penalty, and it won't bother me if they enforce it that way.
Well, with respect to the death penalty, I don't have a bloodlust, but I've always believed that in the appropriate case, that's the appropriate penalty. And I think this is that kind of situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've always believed that. I'm for capital punishment in particular cases after all the appeals have been gone through and all the DNA has been checked and the time is right to do that. And the governor of Utah made it very, very clear that they're going to seek the death penalty on the state side, though, of course, it's not his decision to do. So he's in a way talking beyond his portfolio.
He had a moment.
But he's expressing the thoughts of the people of Utah as he sees it. And obviously, if there's a federal crime, if it's a violation of civil rights, that could also be a death penalty case as well.
And to be fair to him, he used that moment very well. It was a wonderful speech
I think
that
he's
he made
He's very
yesterday morning.
I didn't know very much about Governor Cox, but he seemed to be a very smart guy and know his stuff. Let's go back to conspiracy theories. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there's sometimes that there are in fact conspiracies. What leads people to conspiracy theories, it could be it fits their own agenda, it's their worldview. It could be that there are unanswered questions about what happened if they don't do a transparent job of explaining what happened. But the little we know about the facts to date, Governor, is he got up on top of a roof and he was 200 yards away, and he had a so-called long gun, high-powered rifle, and was one shot and one shot only, and allegedly hit with precision in his neck and hit the artery in the neck, and
that'll do it every time.
The death sentence. Now, better minds than mine who understand this forensics will say, well, maybe he wasn't aiming for the neck, that he was aiming for the head and he hit the neck. I don't know. Maybe somebody can tell you that. You have to look at the angles of this shot and distance. But the question is, how come he's such a proficient sniper? I don't know the answer. I don't know what training he had.
Good question.
Didn't have. But that's something they have to find out. And the question is, if he was a proficient sniper, how did he get that proficiency? Did he work with other people on that? Did he do it by himself? Was he a member of a gun club? It's Utah. It's the West, after all. So you have something of a gun culture out there. I don't know the answer to that, but that's worthy of investigation. There were a couple of pieces out there that lend themselves to conspiracy theories. I'm not adopting a conspiracy theory. I just say there are a couple of pieces. One piece was there was a person who jumped up right after the shot.
And waved their hand, yeah.
Right, got up, was wearing a baseball cap, had a beard, hair flowing, and turned around in the direction of where the shot came from and was doing fist bumps and like this was the greatest thing in the world, cheering it on. Now, they've talked to this person apparently, and he's denied that this was what he was about. He was just trying to warn the security people to leave or something. I don't know what that story makes no sense to me based on the quotes I read in the paper. But why is he smiling, and why does he look like he was engaged and happy about it?
It's very bizarre.
So that in itself is bizarre in itself. But again, he may be just another crazy loon in the audience, and this is incidental to what this kid up on the roof did. Then at the same time about the shooting, I've read, and there's some commentators on radio and television said seemed to be people at the time Kirk was speaking, giving signals like baseball signals or football signals, like coach was topping the hat and making facial gestures and hand gestures. Again, I don't know if that's coincidental.
And what would they even want to signal about? He was sitting in a chair. He wasn't moving around.
Yeah, I just don't know what that's about, and I'm not subscribing that it's accurate or correct. I'm just saying questions like that, having been proffered, need to be answered with transparency. Because if there was no conspiracy, that series of charges about conspiracy have to be distinguished and destroyed. So conspiracies. Let me tell you a little thing I know about conspiracies, having been a prosecutor and having been a judge. They're very, very hard
but not a conspirator.
Not in a conspiratorial sense.
Good.
but having observed them and investigated them and dealt with them as a lawyer, as a judge. Number one, they're very hard to establish. Number two, they're very hard to carry out and to maintain, to be successful. And they're very hard to cover up. So all those things, the establishment of it, the keeping the secrecy, maintaining and affecting the results and keeping it under wraps, all those things go together. They're very, very hard to have that. But the problem is, and you alluded to it, we live in an age of the internet where everybody has their own theory and they're spouting out all kinds of stuff. Now, there's been this wave, and you know this, David, there's been this wave in the United States and worldwide of anti-Semitism, which ironically flows from the fact that the community in Israel was attacked by the Hamas, an Islamist cult, a terrorist group, and somehow the Israelis are to blame. And this is disintegrated into, as they fight back to protect themselves against an existential threat, this somehow is justified all this worldwide anti-Semitism and this reckless behavior by a lot of states, whether it be Spain or England or France, Canada, England, all saying they're going to recognize a state of Palestine, even though there's no borders, there's no legitimate government, there's no control of the government, they have no ability to govern at all, no resources. It's a ridiculous proposition, but they're doing this for political posturing. But this is reinforced anti-Semitism worldwide in this country. So it was pointed out to me this morning before there was an announcement of who the shooter was, the alleged shooter was, that there were 1,500, what do you call them when they put them on social media? Tweets? Is that the right word?
Yes.
Tweets. Okay. I come from the world of the 20th century. I had a hard enough time in the 20th century, let alone the 21st.
We wrote
tweets.
letters in those days.
Yeah, tweets.
With
tweets.
stamps on them.
That's exactly right. we knew cursive. Okay.
Right.
So what's the tweets? The tweets were that the Jews were behind the killing of Charlie Kirk. And that got something like somewhere, depending on who the numbers were, 9,000, 12,000, 15,000 likes, which means they endorsed that view. That's a great idea.
Right.
Okay. So somehow Charlie Kirk was the victim of a Jewish conspiracy to kill him. Why? Because even though he's a supporter of Israel and supporter of the Jewish community, he raised a couple of issues about the strategies of the Netanyahu government. And, of course, that led to, so obviously the Jews killed him. Now, Jews didn't kill him. Some Christian kid from Utah, whether he was Mormon or not, I don't know yet, but it doesn't matter. But he was a Christian kid, well, maybe an atheist or maybe an agnostic, I don't know. But he certainly wasn't a Jewish kid. Okay, so, but that was all over the internet. So what you have is all these wild-eyed theories. They're repeated. And the next thing you know, there's a Jewish conspiracy to take out Charlie Kirk. And that's what we're fighting against. People have their narratives, and they have their paranoia, and they have their theories, but yet they refuse to look at the facts straight up and deal with it. Where's the repudiation of that view that the Jews had anything to do with killing Charlie Kirk? I didn't see that.
And also involving that shooting, I was just shocked at some of the commentary that came right after the shooting, particularly from the man from MSNBC who used to be with ABC, Matt Dowd, who they fired instantly, which is what they should have done. And just this idea that here's a man who his family is grieving tonight, and you're going to talk about, basically you're saying the world is a better place without him. That's pretty much what he said.
And you brought it on yourself.
Yeah, and he brought it on himself.
Charlie,
and
brought
by
it
the
on
way,
yourself. What do you expect?
And I'm going to share a conversation that you and I had a few days ago when in 1968, Martin Luther King is shot on April 4th. It's a Thursday night. And I'm listening to the radio, and it was the old News Radio 88. And they brought on Senator James Eastland
Mississippi.
From Mississippi, now no longer with us. And he said, well, I'm sorry, but if you come down here looking for trouble, you'll get it. And it was like, I wanted to smash the radio. I was so angry. I never thought of myself as a violent person. But here's a man who's basically saying, we don't care what happened to Dr. King. Fortunately, within 10 or 15 years, in all of those states, particularly the southern states, there was a different type of culture, a different group of people running things, and things got a whole lot better. But it's that same idea of waiting for a tragedy and coming in and using it to promote your own interests, and without even the slightest thought about how it affects the victim, the members of their family, their friends, their working associates, and their mission, their goal. And that's what this kid did the other day. He killed Charlie Kirk's goal that was shared by a lot of very young people in this country.
Well, our friend Kim Strassel of the Wall Street Journal had a great article, which I commend to everybody, which she says, once you have this culture of violence and you're fostering this culture of violence, don't be surprised if the other side starts shooting at you. And that's the danger, isn't it?
It sure is. And it just gives us an example of the type of system we're in, where some people are just not strong enough to read something on social media and to analyze it, to come to a point of view. And that's what Kirk was saying. Come to a point of view. It probably isn't the same one as mine, but I'll respect it. And he got it from younger people, which no one could have dreamed that this would happen in the last few years. So on that note, I just want to thank you, Your Honor, for coming here on The Left versus the Right. You will be on tomorrow morning, I believe, at 6 a.m.?
Sunday, 6 a.m. to 7 on Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, noted attorney, commentator, essayist Eric Levine. And interestingly enough, our guest on that show, which people can listen to, and we taped it on Thursday, in the final segment, we have Mayor Eric Adams.
Wow.
So that'll be interesting. That'll be interesting for our listeners on Let the Record Show to hear that.
Very good. Well, we're coming up on 4 o'clock. It's John Sterling time here on WABC 77 on your dial. I'm David Paterson, along with my friend, Judge Richard Weinberg. Thank you for listening. And if you weren't listening, that's your fault. Take care.
Thanks for listening to The Left versus the Right. You can hear The Left versus the Right Saturday afternoons at 4. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
This is the story of the one.
As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.